The Battle of Chateauguay, which occurred from October 25th to the 26th of 1813, was one of the outstanding battles of the War of 1812 and one of the most decisive Canadian triumphs. It was fought on the banks of the river Châteauguay along the town of Ormstown, some 50 kilometers southwest of Montreal in Quebec, Canada. Way back then, this region was presided over by the British colony of Lower Canada. The battle was an American invasion battle to occupy the city of Montreal, which was among their highest priorities. The Americans hoped that taking Montreal would give them a chance to sever British control over Lower Canada and perhaps push the British Empire to peace negotiations on reasonable terms, giving more land to the Americans. Among the Americans engaged in the fight were Major General Wade Hampton, Colonel Robert Purdy, and their army. There were around 4,000 soldiers in his troops. They were to advance north and link up with a second, smaller U.S. army. Countering them was a much smaller British-Canadian army of around 1,500. Commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Charles de Salaberry, the French-Canadian commander was known for his commanding skills and unusual defense strategy. The army consisted of British regulars, French-Canadian military, and allied indigenous warriors. He was joined by other important leaders such as Commander of Defense, Captain Joseph Michel Viguier, and Mohawk warriors, who were another unit working in intelligence and psychological warfare, but without one main leader for this war. The outnumbered British and Canadian defenders managed to repel the American attack by using strategies, local familiarity, and deceptions. Lieutenant Colonel de Salaberry allegedly had bugle calls and war whoops sounding all around him, and this made the Americans think that they were surrounded by a titanic army. This psychological trick, backed by strategically situated defenses, thick forests, and ambushes, bewildered and demoralized the invading forces. Colonel Robert Purdy, leading a flank attack on the American line, was delayed by marshes, thick woods, and Canadian skirmishers, and had his men thrown into a mess. The battle never did crystallize into a general open engagement. It was nothing more than sniping and ambushes, which caused sufficient damage and frightened the Americans enough to push them back. Casualties were grounds for Canadian defensive success. The British-Canadian line had lost approximately 5 killed, 16 wounded, and 4 missing, whereas the Americans had lost approximately 23 killed, 33 wounded, and 4 missing, 29 taken prisoner. The successful repelling of Châteauguay halted the American invasion and prevented the capture of Montreal, shutting down that path of the American invasion of Lower Canada. The Battle of Châteauguay was a major morale booster to the Canadians, particularly French Canadians. It proved that a well-coordinated defense by British, French-Canadian, and Indigenous forces would drive back a superior invading force of an enemy from Canadian territory. Lieutenant Colonel de Salaberry was a Quebec hero, and the fight in some ways has been believed to have been a turning point toward gaining the loyalty of French Canadians to the British Crown. It also shattered the illusions of the Americans about Canadian firepower. Early American accounts exaggerated the numbers of the defenders and allowed the legend to prevail that the Americans had been beaten by a much superior force when it was the Canadians who had defeated odds through discipline and improvisation. Aside from its military importance, the conflict also helped to consolidate an emerging sense of Canadian nationhood and identity, especially among the people of Lower Canada. It has remained an enduring symbol of national will and determination, and as a symbol called upon whenever a small but fierce army has been able to overcome a great power army. The Battle of Châteauguay has long been a milestone in the War of 1812 and a classic page of Canadian history.